We are off and running again, and we're so thankful for all the people that we have here today, and we ask your blessing on our time together, Lord. And last time I had to stop halfway through our introduction, and you're going to see why today, because we're going to continue where we left off. So I'm titling this Daniel 1, Intro B, the second half of it. I'm Pastor Dave Kooyers, Country Bible Church in Boonville, California. And I will do my best to get this published on YouTube tonight also. And Daniel means, Dan is the word for judge, and El is the word for God. So God is my judge. And we're going to take a look at a lot of different topics today. I showed you this last time. I still think it's worthwhile. We are traveling into dangerous waters. Most scholars don't teach the Bible, book of Daniel, and they don't also teach the book of Revelation. A local church here, one of my friends who's a very, very knowledgeable Bible teacher at one of the biggest churches on the other side of the mountain over there, he went to the elder board and asked them if he could teach the book of Revelation. And they said, no, we don't teach that here. And they would, I'm sure, put Daniel in the same category. And if you ever see me not wanting to teach or preach or say anything that comes out of the Bible, just go ahead and pick up stones and send me to the Lord, because I'm done. Daniel, God is my judge. No book of the Bible has been attacked more viciously than the book of Daniel. And remember I said, what about Genesis? Evolution is a huge attack on the book of Genesis. Jesus confirmed that Daniel is a valid book of prophecy. Jesus quoted Daniel in the Olivet Discourse. That would be in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. The biggest teachings we have of Jesus, he confirms that Daniel was a prophet of the end times. And that, just the fact that Jesus calls him Daniel the prophet, should perk up your ears and give you a hunger to study the book of Daniel. And I hope that's the case. Devotional Prophecy today says, Daniel is a book that is basically a timeline of the Gentile world powers, from the days of Daniel until and including the tribulation period, the 7 years of judgment on the earth, and the earth dwellers in the future, yet future to October 2024. This time period is known as the times of the Gentiles. Our study of some of these prophecies found in the book of Daniel will reveal to each student of God's prophetic word that the events foretold 2,500 years ago are about to be fulfilled in the near future. Remember, the very next event to happen is the rapture, which could happen this morning before I finish. Let me emphasize this. 2,500 years ago, down to the day prophecies, Daniel 9, we're going to see 173,880 days exactly. And Jesus held the Jews, and that means the Jewish leaders, in the first century, accountable to know this thy day. Jesus held them accountable and said that their town would be destroyed and wiped out because they didn't know the exact day of Daniel's prophecy. I'm paraphrasing now. Daniel is one of what we call the major prophets, and that would include Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. 4 prophets, 5 prophetic books. Jeremiah's got 2 books in it, and that's our timeline basically. Isaiah was about 700 years before Christ. The King David here was, and King David's 1,000, Solomon's 940. Ezekiel is right after that also, and Daniel goes all the way out to 539. October 12th, 539 BC. So I downloaded this, and I apologize up front for the audio quality, but it's their number 114 has nothing to do with us. The Major Prophets is the title of it.
Some of the most well-known quotations from the Bible come from the writings of a group of messengers who worked to call God's people to repentance during a intentional digression. Over time, these warnings went unheeded, and God allowed the nations of Israel and Judah to be overtaken by their enemies. In this video, we'll examine the work of the major prophets. There are 5 books in this group written by 4 prophets. These are referred to as the major prophets because their writings are longer in comparison to the minor prophets, but are of equal importance. The exception to this is the book of Lamentations, which is about 2,000 words shorter than Hosea, one of the longer minor prophets. Lamentations is listed with this group since Jeremiah is the author. The work of these prophets became prominent during the period of the divided kingdom, spanning the destruction of Jerusalem and Babylonian exile. These books are addressed to Israel and Judah, as well as other nations that God would judge at a later time. Numerous references to Christ as the coming Messiah can be found in these writings, laying a foundation for the identity of Jesus as the Son of God. These books are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations of Jeremiah, or Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Let's take a closer look at these books. Isaiah is often referred to as the Messianic prophet due to the number of prophecies concerning Christ in the book. Isaiah delivered warnings to both the northern and southern kingdoms, as well as other nations, including Egypt and Assyria. Jeremiah spans the period prior to the fall of the southern kingdom of Judah and afterwards. Warnings of the imminent judgment of God against the nation are made, as well as statements about pagan powers outside of Judah. Jeremiah foretold of the 70 years of the Babylonian exile before a remnant would return. The prophet also describes the future law that would be given, as well as changes in kingship and the priesthood which were fulfilled in Christ. Jeremiah wrote his lament over the destruction of Jerusalem in the southern kingdom of Judah. He mourns the loss of the beauty of the nation due to spiritual neglect on the part of the Hebrews. Jeremiah's life was one of hardship, earning him the designation of the weeping prophet. Ezekiel was taken to Babylon in one of the first groups of captives. His warnings were sent back to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, who held out hope that they would be delivered from the destruction of the nation that had been prophesied. Ezekiel addresses other nations as well as the captives taken to Babylon. The book uses highly figurative language that is often misunderstood and misinterpreted. Daniel was one of the first of the captives to be taken from Judah to Babylon. Daniel, refusing to corrupt himself at Nebuchadnezzar's service, seeks after God and is blessed with wisdom, including the interpretation of dreams. Daniel's life spans the entire 70 years of the Babylonian exile. Some of the visions that he receives are concerning the end times, and like some parts of Ezekiel, are often misinterpreted. In the next video, we'll review the minor prophets.
So, again, I apologize for the audio on that. Could you get it? So open to Daniel chapter 1, and I'm going to put the text up, and we'll read it. I'll read it to you so we can have it in both languages. But Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. We read this text last time, but it only takes a few minutes, and it's more important than anything else I'll say today, is what God says, and we're going to read that right now. Daniel 1:1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought him to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, 4 youths in whom there was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability to serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature, the language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food, and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Verse 6, Now among them were the sons of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. To Daniel, he assigned the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God had granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then he would make me forfeit my head to the king. Verse 11. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in the matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their food and the wine they were drinking, and to keep giving them vegetables. Verse 17. As for the 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Then at the end of the days, which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, or Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in his realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. Judith, would you turn that heater off, please? So, I love that passage is in there, and a lot of guys comment on it, that they were 10 times better, good looking, and fatter. And those of us who are putting on a little extra weight lately appreciate that better is fatter. So Daniel's organization of it is the first 6 chapters are basically a historical narrative telling us of the events that happened in those first probably 15 or 20 years of their life. We'll be into the 3rd year, I think it is, by the time we get out of this chapter today. So a lot of time has passed. And then the second half of the book, chapters 7 through 12, is more prophetical. Now, there's overlay on both of them. Chapter 2 is just as prophetical as chapter 7. But in generally, the form that they take is more historical narrative compared to prophetical prophecy. So the historical setting of Daniel. We are here about 606 or 605. And again, we always have that range, depends on whose calendar you're talking about, whether it's, when they were ascended to the throne or whether they started ruling or whatever. And by the time we get to the end of the chapter, we're going to be at 603 BC, where Daniel interprets the king's dream. So, sorry, I forgot to click on that. A couple of important, and these are worthwhile for you to, I know a lot of you don't like to memorize numbers and dates, but 1000 BC is easy, and that's the reign of King David. He went from about 1040 to about 1007 or 10, I forget now. And then his son, King Solomon, comes in, and by the time King Solomon dies, they have a civil war, and the kingdom is divided around 930. I usually think of 940 for King Solomon. Then Elijah and Elisha were about 850 BC. Isaiah is about 940 BC. 921 is a crucial one. That's when the 10 northern tribes went into a captivity of the Assyrians. And they were not the 10 lost tribes. Don't buy into that lie. The 10 tribes are carried in there. God arranged for lions to start attacking the people in the kingdom, in the land of the 10 tribes, to the point that the Assyrian king goes and finds the priests that were of the land, sends the priests back to try to pacify this local dia that he thought he was dealing with. And God honored that. Before that, there was a natural separation between the 2 southern tribes and the 10 northern tribes. Everybody that wanted to get into idolatry and sin migrated to Las Vegas and San Francisco. They migrated up into the northern 10 kingdoms. And everybody that didn't want to be worshiping the false idols that they'd set up in the northern kingdom, but they wanted to worship the one true God, those migrated to the south. And that's recorded in Scripture. And so you've got this, all 10 tribes, all 12 tribes are in the south, and all 12 tribes are in the north also, when the 10 northern tribes are carried off it. 721 BC is a big deal. And again, sometimes you'll see it listed as 722 BC. Then we have our 3 dates, 606 BC, 597 BC, and 586 BC are the 3 sieges of Nebuchadnezzar of Jerusalem. And the last one, he literally wipes the place to the ground. We think that all that was left was Solomon's colonnade. It's that bad. And a few other things, but he wiped it out. And then October 12th, 539 BC, Babylon fell to the Medo-Persian Empire. And I put in here, I added, that was not destroyed then. 539 BC was the fall of the Babylonian Empire, but not the destruction of Babylon. That's yet future to us now. You can read about it in Revelation 17 and 18. Carchemish is a very, very crucial battle. I'm going to show you that, even though it only comes up 3 times in the Bible. On his way home from defeating Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, King Nebuchadnezzar II, that's our King Neb, stopped off and besieged Jerusalem the first time in 605 BC. Battle of Carchemish was a major turning point in world history, and it consequently affects Israel's history. So that's why we're taking time to look at the Battle of Carchemish. It's a big, big deal. It's the end of Egyptian dominance and the start of the Babylonian one world system. Wikipedia says the Battle of Carchemish was fought around 605 BC, ellipsis, between the armies of Egypt, allied with the remnants of the army of the former Assyrian Empire, against the armies of Babylonia, allied with the Medes and the Scythians. This was while Nebuchadnezzar was commander-in-chief and Nabopolassar was still king of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar became king a few weeks after this battle. So this is a crucial point. It's important to us. Why? Because of the players here. Babylon was allied with the Medes, Medo-Persian Empire, Iran. They're major players in the yet future battle of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38-39. And also the Scythians. We talked about them before. They're major players in the Magog invasion. Think Russia and those allies up there. Nabopolassar was King Neb's dad. And he was off on foreign business. And King Neb was going down waging these wars. And then when he takes and seizes Jerusalem, then he gets word, messenger comes, tells him, your dad's died, you got to rush home. And so he only took a few things out of the temple, set up a vassal king, jumped on his pony, and away they went. And he went back to claim his his kingdom before somebody else took in. So this again is from Wikipedia. Battle of Carchemish, Part of the Egyptian Babylonian Wars, the Battle of Carchemish, as depicted by Hutchinson's in his Story of the Nations. These are horrible, bloody battles. So it's easy to just kind of name them and move on and not think too much about it. But it's a big one. Unger's Bible Handbook says, located west of Haran on the bank of the Euphrates, Carchemish was been visited by Abraham on his journey from Ur of the Chaldees. Sargon II of Assyria took Carchemish in 718 BC, so that would be a few years after he ravaged the 10 northern tribes. Josiah went to Carchemish to fight Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, in 2 Chronicles 35. King Neb defeated Pharaoh Necho about 605 BC and began the Babylonian Empire. Babylonian Empire is a big deal. Major power, major wealth, controlling influence basically of the whole known world. He sieged Jerusalem and started the Babylonian captivity of the southern kingdom. That's from Unger's Bible Dictionary. So it only comes up, Carchemish only comes up those three times in the Bible. It's a city on the Euphrates, and we don't get a lot more than that from it. But this is after the Assyrian Empire, but before the Babylonian Empire. And do you see how parceled out it is? There's no major force dominant here. As compared to here, now you have the Babylonian kingdom, Scythians are up there, Sumerians are there, and so on. But, Babylonian kingdom went way south even. And then, let me remind you again of Nebuchadnezzar's 3 sieges of Jerusalem. 606 BC, 597 BC, 586 BC. 606 is when Daniel went in captive. They only took some of the choicest cups and gold cups and stuff, and the cream of the crop of the princes and the best scholars, and took them to brainwash them. Then the vassal king that he set up rebelled against him. So next time he was in the area, he came and sieged them again, 597 BC. This time he took a bunch more. He took, all of the educated, trained people and put them into slavery. Took more and more, the bronze vessels and a lot of others. Then that vassal king that he'd set up rebels against King Neb also. And so King Neb comes back in 586 BC and levels the place, wipes them out. And so there's 2 starts of this Babylonian captivity, and that's crucial. We'll get into the prophecy of it later. But Daniel 1:1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it, about 606. Let me pause for a moment here and pound on the pulpit a little bit. The only holy book in the world that has this kind of details, place names, dates, people names, details of what happened and the prophecies that were predicted or fulfilled. Only the Bible has this. You won't find anything like this in any other holy book on the planet. And you sure aren't going to find it in the Book of Mormon or anything else. King Neb is a big player. He comes in here, 91 uses of his name in the Bible in 88 verses. And they're mostly in Jeremiah and Daniel. And stop and consider that Jeremiah is 51 chapters. It's a big book. And Daniel's a tiny little book with 12 chapters. And we've got almost as many uses in it. Artifacts from Nebuchadnezzar's time. And I apologize, I didn't get this is one of the guys that I steal slides from. And I can't think of his name. Ken Boa. I think this might have been Ken Boa's slide. And I didn't get it credit on there. And it's from the Oriental Museum of Chicago, Illinois, about 600 BC. They have a baked brick fragment. From the British Museum in London from 2007, they have a little stele. These are all cuneiform writings on there. And then in the Notre Dame, from about 605 to 565, our same time frame, we have a cylinder, the Nebuchadnezzar II cylinder in the University of Notre Dame. So there's a lot of these. I'll pop some in from time to time, and what we're talking about here, this is secular history in secular museums that you can go over there and see the artifacts that the Bible's talking about and we're studying about. Get grounded in the idea that the Bible has this kind of historical backing. Trust in the Word of God. British Museum has this stele here, and I'm going to pull a little chunk out of it out. They say, cuneiform tablet with part of the Babylonian Chronicle from 605, our time frame, to 594. Neo-Babylonian, about 550 to 400 BC, from Babylon, southern Iraq, Nebuchadnezzar II's campaigns in the west. This tablet is one of a series that summarizes the principal events of each year from 747 BC to at least 280 BC. Each entry is separated by a horizontal line and begins with the reference to the year of reign of the king in question. Following the defeat of the Assyrians, as described in the Chronicle from 616, the Egyptians became the greatest threat to the Babylonians. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian crown prince, replaced his father Nabopolassar as commander-in-chief and led the army up to the Euphrates to the city of Carchemish. There he defeated the Egyptians. Later that year, Nabopolassar died and Nebuchadnezzar returned to Babylon to be crowned. Over the next few years, he kept his control over Syria and extended it into Israel. They call it Palestine. Palestine didn't exist yet. In 601 BC, he marched to Egypt, but withdrew on meeting the Egyptian army. After equipping the army, Nebuchadnezzar marched to Syria in 599 BC. He marched westwards again in December of 598 BC, as Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, had ceased to pay tribute. Nebuchadnezzar's armies besieged Jerusalem and captured it on the 15th or 16th of March in 597 BC. The new king of Judah, Jehoiachin, I emphasize that when we read it. This is not Kim, this is Chin, his successor, was captured and carried off to Babylon. A series of expeditions to Syria brings this chronicle to an end in 594 BC. And that's from T.C. Mitchell, The Bible and British Museum. I stopped here with Palestine. The word Palestine was invented about 135 AD, about 135 years after the birth of Christ, more or less, and also about almost 70 years after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And the emperor he wiped them out, he hauled all the Jews off into captivity, he literally plowed the streets of Jerusalem and fulfilled Bible prophecy when he did. And then he named the place after the arch enemies of Israel. He named the place after the land of the Philistines. He called it Palestinia, meaning the land of the Philistines. Philistines hadn't existed for, 900 years, 700 years, but to put a pebble in Israel's eye, he named it after their arch enemies from biblical times. So here's where they were. They were hauled, Jerusalem. I don't see Jerusalem on there now. There it is, right there. So they were here in Jerusalem, and he loaded them all up, hauled them off in captivity. I'm sure they marched the full almost 1,000 miles of distance around the Fertile Crescent. Remember, this is the Arabian Desert, so nobody goes across it. They go around the Fertile Crescent down here by the Tigris and Euphrates to Babylon. And 60 miles south of Baghdad, which is up here, is ancient Babylon. You can go there. Judith and I had the pleasure of going on a cruise with a young man who was a captain in the army named Scott. And he had gone before before the real wars broke out with Iraq, and he went down there and saw what Saddam Hussein is rebuilding ancient Babylon. He spent about 20 years and about $20 billion rebuilding ancient Babylon. He minted coins with his profile superimposed over the profile of King Neb to show that he's, this similar looks, the same bloodline. And ancient Babylon's going to come back into play in chapter 18 of Revelation. So God warned Israel for 23 years before he had them hauled into captivity. 23 years. That's a long time. Think Y2K. Think back to Y2K. I mean, that's about how long we're talking about. So God warned Israel for 23 years. In Jeremiah 25, verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah. In the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, which Jeremiah the prophet spoke to all the people of Judah and to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, from the 13th year of Josiah, the son of Ammon, the king of Judah, even to this day, these 23 years, the word of the Lord has come to me, and I have spoken to you again and again, but you have not listened. Verse 4, and Yahveh has sent to you all his servants of the prophets again and again, but you have not listened, nor inclined your ear to hear, saying, turn now everyone from his evil way and from the evil of your deeds, and dwell in the land which Jehovah Yahveh has given to you and your forefathers forever and ever. And do not go after other gods to serve them and to worship them. And do not provoke me to anger with the work of your hands, and I will do you no harm. Yet you have not listened to me, declares Yahveh, in order that you might provoke me to anger with the work of your hands to your own harm. Verse 8, therefore says the Lord of hosts, because you have not obeyed my words, behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, declares Jehovah, and I will send to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land and against its inhabitants and against all these nations round about. And I will utterly destroy them and make them a horror and a hissing and an everlasting desolation. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of joy and the voice of gladness and the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstones and the light of the lamp. Verse 11, this whole land will be a desolation and a horror, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Then it will be, when 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, declares Yahveh, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it an everlasting desolation. I will bring upon that land all my words which I have pronounced against it, all that is written in the book which Jeremiah had prophesied against all the nations. Verse 14, for many nations and great kings will make slaves of them, even them, and I will recompense them according to their deeds and according to the work of their hands. So God warned them for 23 years, throw away your idols, worship me, turn from your sins, and you won't. He said right in there, if you do, God's got a lot of those if-thens in there. If you do this, I will do that. If this happens, this will happen. If-thens are all over in the Bible. And God gave us another one right there. If you turn from your idols and return to me, you won't be destroyed. But if you don't, you're going down the tubes. I say, has God warned America? Every American has free access to as many Bibles as you want. You can go into any thrift store, tell them you just need a free Bible, and they'll give you one off the shelf. Or walk into virtually any church anywhere in America and ask them if they have a Bible that's worn out that you can get. With one exception, that'd be the synagogue in Santa Rosa. I loved their half Tanakh, and it had a lot of their commentaries in it. And I really wanted that book that I found in the pew, and it was obviously worn out. And I went and asked the rabbi if I could have it. He goes, no, you have to go to the bookstore and buy one. It's like, okay. And they're not open today. But anyway, yeah, the Bibles are free. Every American has access to free Bibles. The two main sins that seem to be tipping points of God's wrath when Gentile nations openly and publicly accept and even promote two things: the spilling of innocent blood, I say that's child sacrifice and or abortion, and the acceptance and approval of gross sexual sins. That's incest, bestiality, and homosexuality. If you want to look at what I'm saying, go to Genesis 19 for Sodom and Gomorrah and the 5 cities of the plain. Look at Nineveh and Jonah. Look at lots of others where Gentile nations are wiped out by God, almost certainly because of these two things. Throw in bestiality, but the big thing is the homosexuality and child sacrifice. They literally used to take their children. They had a big bronze idol of Molech. They would build a fire on it, heat it up sizzling hot, a brazen big deal, and then they would place their babies on the sizzling hot arms of Moloch until their child died. That's almost as bad as what we're doing, tearing the baby's limbs and arms and heads off. So how can God legitimately bless America when we insist on murdering 3,000 of our own children every day, while at the same time exporting the world's major supply of pornography and promoting and allowing some of the most perverse sexual practices? No wonder we don't see American Bible prophecy. And now we've got this human trafficking and fentanyl going back and forth across the non-existent southern border. And, you know, it's... I just shudder to think of what our country has slipped into. When I think back on my teenage years and the America that I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I see what we've become now, I just get chills up and down the back of my neck. What are my grandkids and my great-grandkids going to have to grow up in? It's very, very scary. But there is the if-then. If America would turn from its wicked ways, God, I'm convinced, would bless us again. Billy Graham once wisely said that if God doesn't judge America, he's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. And the only thing I would add is that if God will never need to apologize to anyone, especially Sodom and Gomorrah or America, God will never apologize to Judah either. Their judgment was just. We see that in 2 Kings 24:1. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. And Yahveh, Hashem, sent against him bands of Chaldeans, bands of Arameans, bands of Moabites, bands of Ammonites. So he sent against them Judah to destroy it. What's going on with my focus? According to the word of the Lord Jehovah, which he had spoken through his servants, through the prophets, surely at the command of the Lord it has come upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he has done, and also for the innocent blood which he shed. For he fulfilled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not forgive. That's just the Lord would not forgive. God hates the shedding of innocent blood. It's a big topic in the Bible. It's that's at the top of his list. Why would God hate the shedding of innocent blood so much? He knit those babies together in the womb. They are his. They don't belong to the state. They don't belong to the federal government. They don't belong to their parents. They are God's children. When I read verse 2 here, the Lord sent against them bands of Chaldeans, bands of Arameans, bands of Moabites, and bands of Amorites. I couldn't help but think, yeah, and terrorists from Iraq, and fentanyl from China, and Venezuelan street gangs that are now taking over apartment buildings and taking over shopping centers. I've seen some of that. It's like, are you kidding me? How parallel are we to where we're at now? All this stuff. If you don't believe history repeats itself, you haven't studied history enough. So, continuing with the historical setting of Daniel. To really understand how Israel sought brought themselves into the Babylonian captivity, you really should study 2 Kings 24 and 25:30 and the other passages about it. And there's a lot more than we've just touched the tip of the iceberg of God's warnings for them. Because over half of the American support leaders who promise to continue embracing the same terrible sins God has warned us about. I say, may God help us. We are on a precipice. There's an apparent contradiction. Whenever you have contradiction in anything about the Bible in the same line, you need to have an adjective in front of it. An apparent one, a possible one, or something like that. But there are no contradictions in the Bible, but there's over 400 of them that I'm aware of that are apparent contradictions that our critics like to bring up. If you come across one, send me a question. I've got about 4 or 5 different books I've hanging on to. Jeremiah 32, verses 4 and 5. Zedekiah, king of Judah, will not escape out of the hands of the Babylonians, but will certainly be handed over to the king of Babylon, and will speak with him face to face, and see him with his own eyes. He will take Zedekiah to Babylon, where he will remain until I deal with him, declares the Lord. Then we have Ezekiel chapter 12, verse 13. I will spread my net for him, and he will be caught in my snare. I will bring him to Babylonia, the land of the Chaldeans, but he will not see it. There he will die. So we've got an apparent contradiction. He won't see it, or he will see it with his own eyes. Which is it? You see why our critics like to pick on this one? 32 verses 4 and 5. Hand it over to the king of Babylon, speak with him face to face, and see him with his own eyes. He will take Zedekiah to Babylon. Ezekiel 12:13. He will be caught in my snare. I will bring him to Babylonian, land of the Chaldeans, but he will not see it, and there he will die. So what's the solution? Jeremiah 39, verse 7. He will put out Zedekiah's eyes, bond him with brown shackles to take him to Babylon. 2 Kings 25. Trust me, suffering the wrath of God by the hands of evil men is not something you want to see or be a part of. These guys are bad dudes. What happened to King Zedekiah? They hauled him there. They took all of his sons and lined them up. The king did. In front of Zedekiah's eyes, he watched him kill all of his sons. And then that being the last thing that Zedekiah saw, he took out his eyes. Nice guy, huh? King Neb. When I speak friendly of King Neb, it's for other reasons. And this is another one you really should read, and I thought about dividing it up, but it's 2 Kings 25, basically the whole chapter. We won't go there today. But the king of Babylon was a bad dude. Jeremiah 29:22. Because of them, a curse will be used by all the exiles of Judah who are in Babylon, saying, may the Lord make you like Zedekiah and like Ahab, whom the king of Babylon roasted in the fire. And other passages say he was slow roasted. This isn't a rapid burning at the stake with a big bonfire. This is a slow roasting of a human being, a living human being. Not nice people. We looked at this a lot last time, and there's a couple more slides I wanted to add. But Daniel, very clearly, is the author of the book of Daniel. This book bears the simple title Daniel, not only because he is one of the chief characters portrayed in the book, but more so because it follows a custom, though not a consistent one, of affixing the name of the author to the book he wrote, Bible Knowledge Commentary. Hebrew tradition declares Daniel as the author, I added. So you've got a very, very strong, all of the old commentaries from the rabbis credit Daniel as being the author of it. More importantly, what did Jesus says? Spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Matthew 24:15. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel. If someone else wrote it, Daniel, Jesus should have added, or written in the book of somebody, but not Daniel. Or he should have said, as written about by King whatchamacallit. But Jesus didn't. He credited Daniel. Daniel 12:4. But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. This is his only book, so who would steal his identity? If you're going to steal somebody's identity, you don't go to a guy who only wrote one book. You want to go to Norm Geisler or somebody that wrote 60 or 100, who's famous and everybody knows his name. But not so with Daniel. But here, from God, he's told by Daniel, close up and seal up the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Make no mistake, the book that we're studying now is end times prophecy. Next chapter, you're going to see it. He prophesies all the way to the very end of humanity. So who is this guy, Daniel? Ezekiel 28:3. Are you wiser than Daniel? Is no secret hidden from you? So that's a pretty high recommendation for Daniel. Ezekiel 14:14. Even if these three men, God says, Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they could only save themselves by their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord. Ezekiel 14:20. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they could save neither son nor daughter. They would only save themselves by their righteousness. So when God wants to, in the Old Testament, put somebody on a pedestal, Daniel is one of them. That's why I say he's my hero of the Old Testament. If it wasn't for Daniel chapter 9, we would have no evidence of Dan sinning ever, other than his own testimony in his powerful prayer in Daniel chapter 9. But other than that, there's no fault. We just went through Joseph, and many people think Joseph is the best. But Joseph was deceiving his brothers. He didn't have enough faith to only pray to the Lord. He asked the baker to save his bacon, and so on. But Daniel was second in command to three world rulers. Daniel was without shortcomings. I think it was Chuck Missler, who was a professional executive for his entire career. And he always goes, see, there Daniel was he was a professional executive. But to be second in command of the known world under three different rulers, that's pretty amazing. Very, very amazing. Daniel means God is my judge. Daniel's wisdom had become proverbial as early as 603 BC in Daniel 2, chapter 1. A number of years before Ezekiel spoke about it, Ezekiel 28:3. Thus he may be the same as the following. Fourth, the fourth of the so-called greater prophets of whose early career nothing is known except for what we are told in the book that bears his name. An Israelite of royal or noble descent, according to Josephus and Antiquities. He was carried away captive to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, and with various companions trained for the king's service. So he's raised up to be an ambassador. American Indians did this a lot. They were constantly having their daughter marry the prince in an adjoining tribe. Read about it in the book of Ishi. If they still publish those. I read it 50 years ago. But it's very, very powerful, and they give a lot of the history of it, that if you wanted to have peace with a neighboring tribe, what's the best way? Send your daughter over there to marry their prince. In a few short years, he's probably going to become chief. And now you've got your daughter married to the chief. More importantly, this language barrier that we suffer, me trying to learn Spanish and Hebrew and Greek also, that's not so much of an issue if you've got your firstborn daughter living in their camp and learning their language while she's still young enough to learn it. I finished with that one, didn't I? I think so. Following a custom of the time, he was given, in verse 7, the Babylonian name of Belteshazzar. He gained a reputation first as an interpreter of other men's visions, chapters 2 through 5, then of his own, in which he predicted future triumph of the Messianic kingdom in chapters 7 through 12. Renowned for sagacity, he successfully occupied leading governmental posts under Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and Darius. His last recorded vision was on the banks of the Tigris in the 3rd year of Cyrus. And I tried to emphasize this when I read the text. Daniel's name is Belteshazzar, not this one. This is a different person. Belshazzar doesn't have the T-E in it, but very similar. Dwight Pentecost says, God did not deliver a message through Daniel publicly to the nation of Israel. Yet Jesus called Daniel a prophet, Matthew 24:15. Certainly he was God's messenger with God's message to reveal truths God had him disclosed to him from the Bible Knowledge Commentary. So what he's saying here, unlike Ezekiel and Moses and all the others who would stand up and belt out a prophecy or a warning or a sermon to the entire nation or all the representatives, we don't see that with Daniel. It's more he's working in a Gentile environment. What year is it? I'm glad you asked. Bible Knowledge Commentary says Daniel 1 through 2. The first 2 verses of the book of Daniel state when and how the prophet was taken to Babylon. The events of the book began in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. This seems to conflict with Jeremiah's statement that the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, was in the 4th year of Jehoiakim's reign. Jeremiah 25, verse 1. At least 2 explanations may be given for this apparent discrepancy or apparent contradiction. You always squeeze in an apparent in there. This first is the difference between Jewish and Babylonian reckoning. The Jewish calendar began the year in Tishri, September, October, like now, while the Babylonian calendar began in the spring in the month of Nisan, March and April. If Babylonian reckoning were used, the year Nebuchadnezzar had besieged Jerusalem was the 4th year of Jehoiakim's reign. But if the Jewish reckoning were used, it was only Jehoiakim's 3rd year. Daniel, a Jew, may well have adopted the familiar Jewish calendar. And it's not a simple deal to sift through these things and come up with whose calendar they're reckoning with. But the Bible is the only one. And if you go through the Old Testament, you'll pay attention when it says the rule of the king of Israel. Then the next, you'll flip over to the corresponding book or the next paragraph sometimes, it'll go make a reference to the king of Judah. And that's because we got a divided kingdom and 2 different kings that are ruling it. And we're working back and forth between those various dates. So what year is it? Well, we're dealing with secular calendars and Jewish calendars. The Jews have a religious and a civil calendar. They vary. There's also what we call the accession year. I say President Obama, you can tell when I did the sermon last time. President Obama won the presidency in November of 2008. When was his 1st year of his reign? January of 2009, right? So which year was it? When did he become president? Was it 2008 or was it 2009? Same thing in all of these kings. And it takes a little bit of doing to sift them out. But there's never a contradiction, only apparent contradictions. Then we get this guy Ashpenaz. We don't know much about him. Daniel 1:3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles. My notes say that Ashpenaz has been found by archaeologists, but I can't find the source for it. I didn't spend any more time on it, but that's what I found 15 years ago. Verse 7 brings up Zedekiah's royal family. Verse 7, then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them, and to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. Josephus records that all 4 boys were the sons of Zedekiah in the royal family. These are the princes of Israel. These would be the successor kings of Israel. Royal blood, if you would. I say, do you remember all the publicity and fanfare over Princess Diana? Or what about President Clinton's daughter Chelsea? Remember when that was a big stir? Imagine if all 4 royal princes were hauled off into captivity to a foreign country. That would make every news outlet there is, wouldn't it? It's a big deal here for Daniel also. To have been in line to be king of Israel and then to be a slave in a captivity instead. It's a big shakeup. Make no mistake, what they're doing is an attempted brainwashing of the highest order. Everything that we do nowadays for brainwashing, they're doing. It's an attempted brainwashing. They changed their names, which means changing their identity. Every time you would say, God is my judge, now they've got to say something about Baal or whatever. They changed their food, absolute control over their food. Absolute control over their food, their sleep, their very lives, and their education. They send them off to a liberal college. They marinate them in Babylonian culture. And my question to you is, how would your teenage kids or your grandkids hold up after 3 years with no hope of returning to their destroyed families, town, or even their nation? They have no future where they came from. Zero. They have no hope to go back where they came from. And yet these 4 kids risk their lives to go up and reject the vegetables. Vegetables is the word that we get sperma or seed from also. It's the idea of plant a seed, you get a vegetable, get the vegetable, harvest the seeds off of it. So many think it would include, trail mix, if you would, without chocolate chips. But they gave him new names. Daniel meant God is my judge. And they changed it to Belteshazzar, the prince of Bel. Hananiah was beloved of the Lord. And they changed it to Shadrach, illumined by the sun god. Mishael, who is as God. They changed it to Meshach, who is like unto the moon god. Azariah, the Lord is my help. They changed it to Abednego, servant of Nego, a shining fire. So, powerful thing when you change somebody's name. The Old Testament times and even New Testament times, placing a name on something indicates complete control over it and ownership of it. Who got to name it? So why the Babylonian captivity? 2 Chronicles 36:15. Jehovah, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again by his messengers, saying that he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place, but they continually mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of Jehovah rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Therefore, he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who slew their young men with the sword in this house of the sanctuary, and had no compassion on the young man or virgin, old man or infirm. He gave them all into his hand, all the articles of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of Yahveh, and the treasures of the king and of his officers. He brought them all to Babylon. Verse 19, then he burned the house of God, broke down the wall of Jerusalem, burned all of its fortified buildings with fire, and destroyed all of its valuable articles. Those who had escaped from the sword he carried off to Babylon, and they were servants to him and to his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of Jehovah by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths all the days of its desolation. It kept Sabbath until 70 years were complete. So we slipped from the 606 captivity. We went down into the new one, the 586 BC captivity, and the ultimate total destruction of Jerusalem. Why God's wrath? Well, why do you think America's doing now compared to Israel? I see it as a parallel here. We've slipped into the same wicked morass that Israel was in before they went into captivity. They continually mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until, see the until? Until the wrath of Jehovah arose against his people, until there was no remedy. They got to a point where there was no remedy, no hope left. Also 2 Chronicles 36:21, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. They had cheated God out of 70 years. Every 7 years they were to dedicate, leave the land fallow for a whole year. And they had cheated God out of 70 years. And so God took, over a span of 490 years, and then he took and said, well, you owe me 70 years, you're going to Babylon, captivity for 70 years. And Daniel gets this in Daniel 9:2 when we get there. I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of the years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years, exactly to the day. And 70 times 7, Jesus talked about, Matthew 18:22. Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times 7, but 70 times 7. And then New King James. Chuck Messler records 4 periods of Israel's history, of each one 490 years in Israel's history on page 4 of his Daniel notes. And he records this 70 times 7. And I said, I've been scoffed at for believing Jesus literally. If you've ever get to the point where you've given someone 489 times, rejoice greatly. I would say if you get to 489 and the next one is going to be 490, take it as a promise. Jesus said that you'll be forgiven. So, in closing, remember this is my niece's photo. Explaining the biblical language to kids by Kathy Irwin. While helping my 5-year-old twins rehearse Away in a Manger for their Christmas concert, I struggled to explain the lyrics, "The cattle are lowing." When I told them that people spoke differently in Old Testament times than they do today, my daughter Robin piped up, let me read this, because I know it didn't translate into Spanish, so lo siento. I tried to find a word that was actually close with lowing. I raised beef cattle, so I'm intrigued by bellowing, lowing, mooing. They're all different. And the lowing is, I think of it as like grumbling. They kind of moo, and you hear it. It's not really mooing, and it's not really bellowing. It's a that kind of, and cattle do it. And that's what they were doing So anyway, she says, Old Testament cows low, and New Testament cows moo. So, lo siento, it didn't come through, I know. The word plays don't work, I know that now. So, the end. If you don't swear while you're driving, you're not paying attention to the road at all. Amen? Thank you, folks. With that, I'm going to close, and we'll quit this one here. Do a quit there also. And quick time play.